My name is Shealtiel Weinberg, and we're here today to learn Perek chapter 21 of Tehillim, in the zchus of a refuah shelaimah for my wonderful, awesome, dear cousin, Sarah Rivka Bas Mindel, Sarah Lamdrach, and it is my and our sincere hope that every little bit of learning that we do goes towards full and complete and quick refuah for Sarah. So Perek chapter 21 was written by David shortly after his final defeat of Shaul. So it's a goal he's had for many years. He's finally fully the king of Israel. And of course, as happens so frequently in Jewish history and in David's history in particular, immediately following a victory, especially a major victory, comes an attack. And David is attacked by the Plishtim and of course ultimately defeats them as well. And this Mizmor strikes a balance between these two successes, the success that has occurred and the success that is about to occur. Excuse me. Where the first 8 psukim, the first 8 sentences of the chapter are an expression of joy, of rejoicing by David, and a detailed description of the things he's received from God as a result of God's kindness for David's bitachon, for David's faith. And the second section is more of an appeal for victory against David's enemies, and it's also more of a future-looking description, not just an appeal, but a description of what happens when somebody who has bitachon in Hashem and is rewarded with chesed Hashem has enemies, and how God deals with the enemies of that kind of person. And this Mizmor is also very interesting in that in the first section, David does not refer to himself other than saying Mizmor David. Rather, he says Melech. And there's some debate about whether this term Melech is a reference to Mashiach or just to David. Rashi says we have to read it as just to David. But this word Melech, the Melech, appears very frequently in this first section and then disappears from the second section. And the second section is only a description of what God does to man's enemies and a kind of a combination request and bracha regarding what God does towards man's enemies, and then it kind of ends with this final description of God in God's gvura, and how grateful we are, or how grateful the Melech is, or how grateful the recipient of God's protection against one's enemies are for the gvura of God. So there's this progression that David draws from bitachon, man's bitachon, therefore earning God's kindness, and the expression of God's kindness is internal and with bracha, and external with destruction towards one's enemies. And similarly, it is of course our hope that this Mizmor comes to fruition with Sarah, and that all the learning that we do and all our faith in God and in God's kindness will result in kindness for Sarah and the vanquishing of her current enemy, her illness, and that she will have a refuah shelaimah. So turning to the first section, it goes, "V'amnatzech mizmor David Adonai ba'ozcha yismach melech v'yeshuatecha ma yagel ma'od havad libo natatalo v'areshet tzvatav ba'al manach l'sela ki tikadmenu brachot tov tashim rosho ateretaz chayim sha'al mimcha natatalo orachim imolam ba'ed gadol kvado v'yeshuatecha hod v'hader yishava alav ki tishitehu brachot la'ad tachdeu v'simchat et panecha ki hamelech b'tech v'adonai v'chesed elyon b'yamut." So Amnatzech Mizmor David, God a king. So Melech, here Melech David rejoices in your strength, and in your Yeshua how greatly does he this king exalt. So we go to the gvura and tie it to the Yeshua, and then we'll come back to that in the second section. You've granted him his heart's desire. So David now is going to draw a kind of a progression of goodness that he's been rewarded with. First, that he has been rewarded his heart's desire. Second, that he's been rewarded the desires of his mind expressed through his vasayin, through his lips. Third, then he's therefore accrued brachot tovot, blessings of good. He's acquired a crown of gold. He's acquired long life. He's acquired esteem. And finally, in the progression, he's acquired hod v'hadar, majesty and splendor, but not just the majesty and splendor of a king, or not just the majesty and splendor of David specifically, but the majesty and splendor that is reflected upon someone when they are protected by God and when they are given brachot from Hashem that become eternal. That is David's description of Hod v'Hadar. All this is a result of his faith in Hashem. So we presented him with blessings of good. You placed on his head a crown of pure gold. He asked you for life. You granted it to him, length of days forever and ever. Great is his esteem, his kavod, because of your Yeshua. You've conferred upon him majesty and splendor. For you set him with brachot forever. You've delighted him with the intense joy of your presence. For the king trusts in Hashem, and in the kindness of the Most High he will not falter. So bitachon results in chesed. David now calls upon Hashem to destroy the remainder of David's enemies, which are also God's enemies, or vice versa. Timsa yadecha l'chol eivecha yimincha timsa sonecha tishtemu ketanur esh la'ed panecha Adonai be'apo yivalem v'toch leim esh Piryamo me'eretz ta'abed v'zram mibnei adam ki natu alecha ra'ah chashvu mizma ba'al yochalu ki tishitemu shechem b'mitarecha techonen al paneim ruma Adonai be'ozecha nashira nizmra gvuratach. Your hand find all your enemies, may your right hand find those who hate you. May you deal with them like a fiery furnace at the time of your anger. May Hashem swallow them in his wrath and let a fire consume them. Obliterate their works and their possessions from the earth and their seed from mankind. And this is commonly understood to be a reference to Amalek. And it works in tandem with David's description, his final description of his bracha, where he talks about how this bracha will be eternal through his seed, through future generations. Whereas here, when he's describing the destruction that God will wreak on David's enemies, it is not just a destruction of them now, but a destruction of them forever. So it's the inverse. This expression of Gvura results in the inverse form of the bracha. For they have planned evil against you, they have schemed, though without the ability to execute. And again, this is a direct reference to bitachon, in that in planning evil against God, essentially you are denying God. So they scheme without the ability to execute, and therefore result in destruction because of their absence of bitachon. Because you isolate them with your bow, you aim directly at them, and there's some debate about whether or what exactly meitorecha means, but it's usually described as a bow, as in bow and arrows, aim directly at them. And then the final praise, the final bracha, Ruma Adonai bo'ezecha nashira nizmra gvurasecha. The exalted Hashem in your strength. So the result of Gvura is Gvura, and nashira nizmra gvurasecha. And we will sing and chant the praises of your might. So that concludes the Perek, and again, it is my sincere and all of our sincere hopes and prayers that all the learning we do will result in a refuah shelaimah for Sarah Rivka Bas Mindel.